Taxation Part 2, the discussion on donor's tax. Okay? Before we already discussed the estate tax, which is a kind of transfer tax. We now go with donor's tax naman. From the word donation. Yan. So here we have the so-called donation or gift. Always remember that donation is gratuitous in nature. Walang bayad. Okay? In the civil law of property, donation is an act of liberality whereby a person, the so-called donor, yung magdo-donate, okay, he disposes gratuitously of a thing or a right. Pwedeng isang bagay o pwedeng isang karapatan in favor of another. Yung pagbibigyan ng donation, that is the donee. You call it the donee who accepts it. Always remember, there must be an acceptance. Here, give is a voluntary transfer naman of property from one person to another without any consideration or compensation. Always remember that the acceptance of the donee should be made known to the donor while he is alive. So, si Pedro, dinonate niya yung kalabaw niya kay, example lang to, si Pedro may kalabaw siya, dinonate niya kay Juan, example. Ngayon, yung kalabaw niya, sakitin. So, nag-alanganin ngayon si Juan kung tatanggapin niya yung kalabaw kasi nga, sakitin to, baka maggasto-gastos lang to ng mga vitamins later on o kaya mga gamot, ganyan. Here, there must be an acceptance. Okay? Dapat, itong acceptance na to, it should be made known to Pedro, the donor, during his lifetime. Otherwise, there's no valid donation. Okay? So, always remember na ang donation is gratuitous in nature. Dapat wala po tong bayad. Otherwise, it's not donation. Okay? Under the law, the property that can be subjected to donation can be classified as a movable or immovable. Na-discuss ko na to before. Okay? Under the law, ang movable, example yung kalabaw. Okay? The donation of a movable o yung kalabaw, example lang po, can be made orally or in writing. Pwedeng through oral or yung salita lang. Okay? Or in writing or kailangang isulat. Okay? An oral donation requires the simultaneous delivery of the thing or of the document representing the right donated. So, kailangang i-deliver mismo yung property kung ito ay isang movable property. In case of immovable, example, lupa. Okay? In order that the donation of the immovable be valid, it must be in a public instrument. So, hindi po pwede ang oral donation sa immovable. Kailangang nakasulat. At hindi lang po dapat nakasulat. It must be in a public instrument or public document. So, you will be needing the services of a notary public. You have to notarize the document in order to convert it from private instrument into a public instrument. Okay? So, how about donor's tax? What is a donor's tax? A donor's tax is a tax levied, assessed, collected, and paid upon the transfer by any person, resident or non-resident of the property by gift, okay, as provided in your section 98 of NIRC. It shall apply whether the transfer is in trust or otherwise, whether the gift is direct or indirect, and whether or not the property is real or personal, tangible or intangible. Section 98 of your NIRC. It is a tax on donation. Again, it's not a tax on the property. It is a tax on the act of donating. Yun yung donation. Okay? Always, again, in case of donor's tax, donor's tax. It is imposed against the donor's act of donating. Okay? Hindi yun na-impose dahil because of the acceptance of the donor. It's because of the donation of the donor. Okay? So, it must be gratuitous or it must be free. Okay? Ma'am, paano yung magagastos ko ganyan dahil sa donation? Hindi po yun kasali. It is a consequence of your acceptance. As long as, dapat hindi mo tinanggap. Diba? Dapat in-expect mo na yan kung tatanggapin mo. So, it's the act of donating the property, hindi yung property itself. Okay? The nature of donor's tax is not a property tax. Again, hindi yun tax sa property. Okay? It is a tax imposed on the transfer of property by way of donation or gift. Okay? It is an excise tax. Okay, it is an excise tax. It is a direct tax on the part of the donor. Sa donor lang to ini-impose, hindi sa doni. And it applies to both natural or juridical person. Sa ang donor's tax, 'di ba? Yung estate tax imposable lang to sa individual kasi nga po ang namamatay lang na nawawalan ng tibok ng puso ay ang tao, individual lang. Ang donor's tax, hindi lang sa individual, kundi pati na rin sa mga korporasyon o the so-called juridical persons. Kasi under our law, there are two kinds of persons. Okay? Hindi yung living and the dead, kasi ang dead is not a person. Okay? Ang two kinds under the law is the natural person and the juridical person. An example of natural person is us, the human beings. Okay? While a juridical person, example, corporation, partnership, agency, ganyan. So, what is the object of the donor's tax? Okay? That is to prevent the avoidance of income tax through the device of splitting income among the numerous donors who are usually the members of the family or the so-called trusts, with the donor escaping the effect of progressive rates of income tax. So, next. Always remember na ang donation, there are two kinds. Okay? It can be a donation inter vivos or donation mortis causa. Diba na-discuss naman natin din kanina sa ST tax na there are two transferable taxable transfers. The transfer mortis causa and transfer inter vivos. Ngayon naman sa donation, ganun din. Donation inter vivos at donation mortis causa. Mortis causa from the word mortis or death. So, after the death. Ganun din sa donation. Donation after the death. Donation inter vivos or during the lifetime from the word vivos or life. Okay? And always remember na ang donation mortis causa is not the kind of donation that is subject to donor's tax. The donation mortis causa or the donation that takes after the death are governed by the laws on taxation. They partake the nature of testamentary disposition and shall be subject to estate tax. Kahit na donation mortis causa yan from the word donation and yan donor's tax. Inulit ko, baka lalabas to sa exam ninyo. Okay? Pag donation mortis causa, a donation or a transfer which takes place after the death. Okay? O na may namatay. Di ba? It takes effect after the death. Namatay yung decedent. Di ba? Tignan nyo yung requisites ng imposition or kung kailan may impose ang estate tax. Pasok lahat yung requirements, right? So, estate tax will be imposed and not donor's tax. Kasi ang donor's tax will only be imposed during the lifetime. Okay? Always remember na in a donation intervivos, okay, it is the one that takes after during the lifetime of the donor. So, here, donor stock syempre ang i-impose. So, what are the requisites of a valid donation as provided by the new Civil Code of the Philippines? Article 725 provides, donation is an act of liberality whereby a person disposes gratuitously of a thing or a right in favor of another who accepts it. Okay? Kailan nagkakaroon ng valid and complete donation? Number 1, there must be an intent to donate by the donor. Okay? Number 2, the donor must have the capacity to donate. Number 3, the delivery of the donated property, especially in the case of movable property. Number 4, acceptance of the donate. Kailangang may acceptance, hindi pwedeng secret-secret lang yan. Dapat may acceptance. And number 5, the donation must be in proper form in case of movable. Okay, if that is less than 5,000 pesos, it can be oral or in writing. Pero kung more than 5,000 pesos yan, it shall be in writing. And in case of immovable naman, it must be in a public document. Okay? What are those instances or transfers which may be considered as donation? Ano yung mga pangyayari? Ano yung mga actions na considered as donation? Okay? Number 1, sale, exchange, or transfer of property for less than adequate and full consideration. Ito yung mga sa considered, kumbaga. Example, isang property, isang hektarya ng lupa, binenta ni Pedro kay Ana ng 10,000 pesos lang. Okay? 2021 na ngayon, ha? And that is considered to be less than adequate and full consideration. Isang hektarya, tas 10,000 pesos lang. So, mas mahal pa yung cellphone natin ngayon. Okay? The general rule, okay, always remember this. The general rule is that where the property, other the real referred to in section 24, is transferred or for less than an adequate and full consideration, then the amount by which the fair market value of the property exceeded the value of the consideration shall be deemed as a gift. As an exception, okay, listen, the transfer of property made in the ordinary course of business, okay, then and that business is a transaction which is bona fide at arm's length and free from any donative intent, will be considered as made for an adequate and full consideration in money or money's worth. Here, there are requisites. Okay, the excess of fair market value over the value of the consideration will be considered as donation and subject to donor's tax. Ang ifa-follow, ang magiging taxable is not the, for example, 10,000 pesos. Ang zonal value ng property is, for example, 500,000 as assess. Kaya sabihin natin assess value, it's 500,000. Binenta lang ng 10,000 pesos. Ang magiging basis ngayon for taxation purposes is the higher value, and that is the assess value. So, yun. In case of condonation or remission of debt naman, anong ba itong natawag natin condonation or remission of debt? Ang condonation or remission of debt is defined as an act of liberality by virtue of which, without receiving any equivalent, the creditor renounces the enforcement of the obligation, which is extinguished in its entirety or in that part of or aspect of the same to which the remission refers. It is an essential characteristic of remission that it be gratuitous. Ano ba tong salitang condonation? Okay? Ang condonation is from the word condone, it is something that you justify or you disregard. Ayaw mo, parang ganun. One that you, okay, approve, ganun. Ano naman tong tinatawag nating remission? Ano bang simpler word ng remission? Ang simpler word ng remission is the cancellation of a debt or a charge. As if you forgive something that you pardon, something that you abrogate or revoke. Yan, ganun ang remission. Okay? So, another one is the renunciation of inheritance. Okay? Renunciation of inheritance in favor of the heirs is subject to donor's tax. Bakit? Kasi nga, as if it is equivalent of donation. Okay? Renunciation by the surviving spouse of his share or her share in the communal property of gains or absolute community of property, okay, after the dissolution of the marriage in favor of the heirs of the deceased or any other person, or the renunciation by an heir specifically and categorically in favor of identified heirs to the exclusion of or disadvantage of the heir, coerced and hereditary estate. Ganito yan. Example, si Pedro, di ba may anak siya, si Ana at saka si Pedro, Ana at saka si Juan. Si Ana at Juan ay magkapatid. Okay? So, namatay ngayon si Pedro. May minana ngayon ni Ana at saka ni Juan yung mga properties. Sabi ni Ana, ay mag-abroad na lang ako. Sabi niya, I'm renouncing my right over that property. Sa'yo na lang yan. Ayoko yan, property na yan. Hindi ko rin naman maaalagaan. Baka masira lang. Example, bahay yung naman na niya. Property ba sa kanya isang bahay. That is a renunciation by an heir in favor of his brother. One. In that case, the renunciation of inheritance, that is inheritance namana ni Ana yun sa tatay niya kay Pedro. That act is considered to be subjected to donor's tax. Okay? Always remember the classifications of donor. Ang donor, okay, pwedeng isang juridical being or a natural being. Okay? And of course, it can be a resident or non-resident. Sa Pilipinas daw or wala. Okay? If the donor is a resident citizen, a non-resident citizen, a resident alien, or a domestic corporation or a resident foreign corporation, they are liable for donor's tax regardless of whether the gift was made or where the property is located. In case naman ng isang non-resident alien or non-resident foreign corporation, they are also liable for donor's tax only if the property donated is within the Philippines. Okay? We also follow the rule on mobilia secuntur personam, or the movable follows the person in case of intangible personal properties. Okay? Follow also the same rule. Except, of course, when it's inconsistent with the provisions of law. And the rule of reciprocity also applies. Next, what are those gifts, donations that are part of the gross gift? Tinatawag natin kanina may gross estate, ngayon gross gift naman. Okay? Kindly read yung binigay kong outlines yan. Babasa nyo naman dyan. Doon na lang tayo sa not subject to donor's tax. Anyway, yung gross gift, di ba, kakadiscuss ko lang ngayon lang. Okay? What are those not subject to donor's tax? Again, na-discuss ko na yung kanina, yung donation mortis causa, din kasali, estate tax yun. Okay, number 1, the contributions to a candidate or political party for campaign purposes duly reported to COMELEC. Okay? That's not subject to donor's tax. Yung mga example, magraran na mayor si Ana sa Tugigaraw, supporter niya ako, bigyan ko siya ng 10,000 pangbili ng mga poster, ganyan. Then, that will not be part of the gross gift. Okay? Before RA 7166, a donation for a political candidate was subjected to donor's tax. Ngayon, hindi na. Under RA 7166, okay, contributions duly reported to BIR are not subject to donor's tax as long as it is utilized in his campaign. So, before, nung wala pang RA 7166, subjected sa donor's tax. Ngayong may RA 7166 na, hindi na to subjected sa donor's tax as long as it is also utilized in his campaign. Dapat ginamit to for campaign purposes. Okay? Yung mga hindi nagamit, anong mangyayari, ma'am? Yari, 1 million sa donated. Ang total na na-donate sa kanya 1 million. Okay? May sobra na 100,000. Okay? The unutilized or excess campaign funds, okay, yung campaign contributions, net of the candidate campaign's expenditures, it shall be considered as subject to income tax. Okay? Yung 100,000 na sobra, masasubject siya sa income tax and must be included in the candidate's taxable income. So, since 1 million ang donated sa kanya, again, itong donor's tax na to, itong donations na to, hindi subject sa donor's tax as provided by law, hindi siya taxable as donor's tax. Kung yung mga hindi nagamit, for example, 100,000 ang natira, it will be taxable as income tax on the candidate. Okay? Kasi magiging income niya na to. Another one is the gift to parish or the church. Okay? Of course, this rule only applies only to real property tax. And another one is onerous donations or donations in exchange for goods or services. They are, of course, subjected to income tax. Are the donations made to homeowners association taxable? Yes, but it's subject to donor's tax. Who are the persons liable in case of filing of return and payment sa donor's tax? Okay? Persons liable, every person, whether natural or juridical, resident or non-resident, who transfers or causes to transfer property by gift, okay, whether in trust or otherwise, whether the property is direct or indirect, or whether the property is real or personal or movable or tangible, kung sino yung nag-donate, okay? Kung sino yung nag-transfer. And that person is liable. Who files for the donor's tax return, okay? Separate return is filed for each gift made on different dates during the year, reflecting therein any previous net gifts made in the same calendar year. So, if the gift involves a conjugal or community property, each spouse, yung babae o lalaki na mag-asawa, shall file separate return with respect to his or her respective share in the said property. Kailan ifa-file yung donor's tax return? The return must be filed within 30 days from the action or from the date when the gift was made or completed. The tax due shall be paid at the same time the return is filed, yung pay as you file rule. Okay? Who will file? Of course, the person who made the gift. Where to file the donor's tax return and pay the tax due, okay? Depende yan kung resident or non-residents. In case of residents, okay, can be through the AAB, Revenue District Officer, or the RDO, Revenue Collections Officer, any authorized city or municipal treasurer, where the donor was domiciled at the time of the transfer. In case of non-resident naman, sa mga Philippine Embassy or Consulate Office. Yan. Pwede rin sa directly with the commissioner. So, what is the tax basis in case of the donor's tax? Okay, the tax for each calendar year shall be computed on the basis of total gifts in excess of 250,000 made during the calendar year. So, yung sobra ng 250,000, yun yung magiging basis ng tax. And the tax rate, of course, is a flat rate of 6%. As provided by Section 99. So, there is this so-called exemption of doon sa gross gift na 250,000 pesos. Okay? So, yung magiging sobra, yun yung taxable ng 6%. Okay? Summary. Again, we have two kinds of transfer taxes. It can be either estate tax or donor's tax. At kailan fina-file ang estate tax again? The general rule is within 1 year from decedent's death ang estate tax return. If file mo ang ATR or estate tax return, the general rule within 1 year from the death of the decedent. Okay? As an exemption, pwede ka mag-extend. Pwede naman po, pero not exceeding 30 days. Okay? How about naman DTR o yung donor's tax return? It should be filed within 30 days after the gift was made. Kailan binabayaran ang estate tax? Kailan ka magbabayad ng estate tax again? Di ba na sabi ko na sa inyo kanina to. It should be paid yung pay as you file, ganun din sa donor's tax. Pero in case there is a undue hardship on the part of the heirs or to the executor or the administrator, you are given an extension of 5 years in case the state is settled judicially or 2 years in case of extrajudicial settlement. Okay? Anong mangyayari pag granted yung extension mo? You will file a bond. Okay? Security to. Okay? So, sa donor's tax naman, kung kailan ka magpa-file, doon ka rin magbabayad kasi pay as you file nga. Ayan. So, that ends my discussion on transfer tax. I hope na may natutunan po kayo kahit konti. Thank you for listening.